Since I married you, I paid the bills for 8 years, and now it is 2 years since I lost my job, and you are complaining about the change you give me.
In a quiet neighborhood lived a couple named Daniel and Amaka. From the outside, their home looked peaceful, like any ordinary family trying to make a living. But inside the house, things were far from peaceful. Daniel had once been a respected employee in a logistics company. For 8 years of their marriage, he worked and paid most of the bills. Amaka supported him quietly, managing the home, caring for their child, and running a small provision shop at the corner of their street. But life changed when Daniel suddenly lost his job. At first, Amaka stood by him with understanding. She believed that difficult seasons pass and that a good wife should support her husband in times of trouble. So she began to take on the responsibilities of the home. The little provision shop she owned became the only steady source of income for the family. Every morning she would wake before sunrise, arrange her goods, and open the shop. From the small profits she made, she paid the electricity bills, the water bills, and the school fees of their child. She also bought food and kept the house running. Daniel stayed at home most days. Instead of looking seriously for work, he spent long hours moving around town with friends. Yet, he always returned to Amaka with stories. "My dear," he would say softly, "I have an opportunity. If you can give me some money, I can start a small project that will benefit our family." Amaka believed him. She would count the little money she had saved from the shop and give it to him. But Daniel had no project. Instead, he would wear his best clothes, spray expensive perfume, and go to a popular restaurant in town. There he would meet his side chick, a woman named Rita. They would sit at a beautiful table, eating and laughing. One evening, while they were waiting for their food, Rita looked at him and asked casually, "What about your wife?" Daniel laughed loudly. "Do I even have a wife?" he said mockingly. "My wife has mouth odor. If not for you, I would have been a dead man in that house." The two of them
You are
laughed and
terrible.
continued gossiping about Amaka, unaware of the pain those words would cause if she ever heard them. Later that night, Daniel would return home and behave like a loving husband. "My dear, how was your day?" he would ask, pretending to care. Amaka, exhausted from the shop, would smile weakly and serve him food. Days turned into months, and months turned into years. Gradually, the provision shop began to struggle. The shelves that were once full of goods started becoming empty. Amaka had used most of her profit to keep the household running and to fund Daniel's so-called projects. One evening, while checking her shop inventory, she sighed deeply. When Daniel came home that night, she gathered the courage to speak. "Daniel," she said gently, "the shop is running dry. I cannot keep paying all the bills and still give you money. Things are getting difficult." Her words immediately angered him. He raised his voice. "Since I married you, I was the one paying bills for 8 years. Now it is just 2 years since I lost my job and you are complaining about the small change you give me?" Amaka looked at him quietly. "That is not true," she said softly. "We both contributed to this home." But Daniel refused to listen. For days, tension filled the house. Then one evening, Amaka told him something important. "I have news," she said carefully. "I am pregnant." She expected surprise or maybe happiness, but Daniel's face immediately hardened. Instead of joy, he showed irritation. "Another child?" he muttered. "At a time like this?" Amaka felt her heart sink. That night, while Daniel slept, she sat quietly in the living room thinking about her life. For years, she had sacrificed everything for the family. She had supported a husband who did not respect her, trusted a man who secretly mocked her, and carried responsibilities that were never meant for her alone. But as she gently placed her hand on her stomach, she realized something. The child growing inside her deserved better, and perhaps it was finally time for her to start choosing herself. Outside, the night was silent, but inside Amaka's heart, a new strength was slowly being born. The house was quiet that evening, but Amaka's mind was restless. Since discovering she was pregnant, she had begun thinking about the future of the child growing inside her. The little strength she had left was now for the baby. One evening after Daniel returned home, Amaka gathered courage to speak again. "Daniel," she said gently, "now that I am pregnant, I will need some money to register for antenatal care at the hospital." Daniel looked at her briefly and then laughed. "Antenatal," he said dismissively. "Did our mothers attend antenatal when they gave birth to us? Nothing will happen to you. Just stay at home." Amaka stared at him quietly. "But things are different now," she replied softly. "The doctor said it is important." Daniel waved his hand. "I don't have money for that. Stop worrying yourself. Women have been giving birth at home for generations." The conversation ended there. Amaka said nothing more, but inside her heart, she felt a deep loneliness. She knew she was carrying the child almost completely alone. As the months passed, the pregnancy became heavier. Her body grew tired more easily, but she still tried to manage the house and the little shop with the small strength she had left. One evening, she began to feel unusual pain in her lower body. The discomfort came and went in waves. She sat down quietly in the living room while her little boy watched her with concern. "Mommy, are you okay?" the boy asked. "I'm fine," she whispered, forcing a smile. But that same evening, Daniel was not at home. Instead, he had called Rita. They met in a hotel across town. Soft music played while they laughed, ate food, and talked carelessly about life. Daniel sprayed perfume and wore his best clothes like a man without worries. While Amaka sat at home struggling with pain, Daniel spent the night with Rita in the hotel. Back at the house, the contractions became stronger. Amaka tried to remain calm so she would not scare her son. The night felt long. Her little boy stayed close beside her, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing that something was wrong. By early morning, Daniel finally returned home. He did not check the living room. He did not ask about Amaka. He walked straight into the bedroom and fell asleep immediately. That same morning, the pain suddenly became intense. Amaka could barely stand. Her breathing grew faster. She called her son. "Please go and call your father," she said weakly. The boy quickly ran to the bedroom and gently pushed the door. "Daddy," he said softly, "Mommy wants to give birth." Daniel turned angrily on the bed. "Leave this room, boy. Can't you see I'm sleeping? I worked all night. Go away." The little boy froze. His eyes filled with tears. Slowly, he walked back to the living room. "Mommy, Daddy said he is tired," his voice shaking. Amaka tried to sit up, but the pain was overwhelming. Sweat covered her face. "Go, call the neighbors," she said faintly. The boy ran outside crying for help. But before he returned with the neighbors, Amaka collapsed on the floor. Her long pregnancy body lay motionless. Blood had stained her gown and spread across her legs and the floor. When the neighbors arrived with the little boy, they gasped in shock. "Quick, carry her," one woman shouted. They rushed Amaka to the hospital as fast as they could. Back at the house, Daniel finally woke up much later. Stretching lazily, he walked into the kitchen. He opened the pot on the stove. It was empty. Daniel frowned and complained loudly. "There is no food in this kitchen." He closed the pot angrily, completely unaware that his wife was fighting for her life in the hospital. Meanwhile, in the hospital corridor, the neighbors sat anxiously while doctors rushed Amaka into the emergency room. Her little boy sat quietly in the corner, holding his small hands together and staring at the floor. Inside the delivery room, the doctors worked quickly. One of them looked at the nurse and said in a serious voice, "If she had come earlier, this situation would have been much easier." Outside, the neighbors waited nervously. Minutes felt like hours. Then, the doctor finally stepped out. Everyone stood up at once. The doctor looked around the room and asked slowly, "Who is Amaka's husband?" But Daniel was not there. The doctor stood still for a moment, his eyes scanning the worried faces in front of him. The corridor had gone completely silent. "Who is Amaka's husband?" he repeated. The women looked at each other. No one answered. One of the neighbors finally spoke, her voice low. "He's not here, doctor." The doctor took a deep breath, then nodded slowly, as if confirming something in his mind. "She lost a lot of blood," he said carefully. "We are doing everything we can to save her. But the baby..." He paused. The little boy lifted his head. The baby did not survive. A wave of shock swept through the corridor. One of the women covered her mouth. Another sat down heavily on the bench. The little boy stared blankly, not fully understanding, but sensing that something terrible had happened. "Is my mommy okay?" he asked quietly. The doctor looked at him, then softened his voice. "She is still alive," he said, "but she is very weak. The next few hours are critical." The boy nodded slowly, his small hands tightening together. Back at the house, Daniel had just finished eating the little food he managed to find outside. He returned home, still unaware, and lay down again, scrolling through his phone. It was then his phone rang. He ignored it the first time. It rang again. Irritated, he picked up. "Hello? Daniel, where are you?" A neighbor's voice came through, tense and urgent. "At home, what is it?" There was a brief silence on the line. "Your wife is in the hospital." Daniel sat up immediately. "What do you mean?" "She collapsed this morning. She was bleeding. We brought her here. The baby," the woman hesitated. "The baby is gone." The words hit him, but not fully. "What about Amaka?" "She's fighting for her life." The call ended. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not pride. Fear. Real fear. At the hospital, hours later, Daniel rushed into the corridor, breathing heavily. His eyes moved quickly until they fell on his son. The boy looked up at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the boy stood up slowly. "Daddy," he said, his voice small. "Mommy called you." Daniel froze. The weight of those words settled heavily in the air. He turned to the neighbors, but none of them spoke to him. Their silence was louder than any insult. The doctor stepped forward. "Are you the husband?" Daniel nodded. The doctor looked directly into his eyes. "If your wife had been brought in earlier, things would have been very different." That sentence did not shout, it did not accuse, but it cut deeper than anything Daniel had ever heard. Later that night, Amaka lay in the hospital bed, pale and weak, her eyes barely open. Daniel stood beside her. For the first time, he had nothing to say. No excuses, no pride, no laughter, just silence. Amaka slowly turned her head and looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, only something worse. Distance. A quiet, broken distance. And in that moment, Daniel realized something he had never understood before. Some mistakes do not end with apology. Some moments, once lost, can never be repaired. The hospital room carried a quiet heaviness in the days that followed. Amaka survived, but something inside her had changed completely. She spoke very little. She ate only when the nurses insisted. Most times, she simply stared ahead, her eyes calm but distant, like someone who had seen too much and felt too deeply to return to who she once was. Daniel tried, at least on the surface. He brought fruits, he asked the nurses questions, he stood beside her bed longer than he ever had before. But even in those moments, Amaka could feel it. It was not love, it was guilt. And guilt, she knew, never stays long. A few days after the doctor's warning, Daniel stepped outside the hospital corridor and pulled out his phone. He called Rita. "Hello, baby." Rita's voice came through, light and playful. Daniel sighed. "Things are complicated right now." Rita laughed softly. "You always say that. Where are you?" "At the hospital. My wife..." He hesitated. Rita's tone changed slightly. "So, when are you coming to see me?" Daniel leaned against the wall, tired. "I don't have money right now. Everything has been going to hospital bills." There was a short silence. Then Rita spoke again, her voice colder. "So, you mean you want me to sit and wait for you without taking me out?" Daniel swallowed. "Just give me some time." Rita scoffed. "Daniel, I don't do that. If you don't have money, don't call me." And just like that, the line went dead. Daniel stared at his phone. He called again. No answer. He sent a message. No reply. Days passed. Rita stopped picking his calls completely. The same man who once laughed loudly in restaurants, who mocked his wife to impress another woman, now stood alone in a hospital corridor, ignored by the very person he had chosen over his home. For the first time, he began to understand something. What he called love had only ever been convenience. Weeks later, Amaka was discharged. She returned home, but the house no longer felt like home. The walls were the same, the furniture was the same, but everything else had changed. She moved quietly, doing only what was necessary. She cared for her son. She rested when she could. She spoke only when spoken to. Daniel noticed it. At first, he tried to act normal. Then, gradually, his behavior began to shift again. One evening, as Amaka lay on the bed, still weak from everything she had gone through, Daniel sat beside her. He reached out and touched her arm. "Amaka," he said softly. She slowly turned her head and looked at him, her expression blank. "I have missed you," he continued. There was something uncomfortable in his tone, something selfish. Amaka understood immediately. "I am not strong yet," she said quietly. Daniel forced a small smile. "It has been weeks. You are fine." She shook her head slowly. "No." But Daniel did not stop. That night, he tried again and again. Each time, Amaka refused. Not with anger, not with shouting, just with a quiet, firm no. A few days later, Daniel's patience ran out. The mask dropped. One evening, he stood in the middle of the living room, his voice rising. "So now you cannot even perform your duty as a wife?" he snapped. Amaka sat quietly, her son beside her. "I just told you I am not ready," she replied calmly. Daniel laughed bitterly. "Then what are you still doing in my house?" The words hung heavily in the air. Her son looked up, confused. Amaka's eyes slowly lifted to Daniel. There was no fear in them. "You want to send me out?" she asked. Daniel folded his arms. "If you cannot act like a wife, then yes, you can leave." Silence filled the room. For a moment, nothing moved. Then something settled inside Amaka. Not anger, not pain, clarity. That night, she did not argue. She did not cry. She simply watched him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time in years. A man who could ignore her pain, a man who could betray her trust, a man who could stand in front of her after everything she had lost and still think only of himself. That night, Amaka made a decision. A few days later, very early in the morning, before the sun rose, she quietly packed a small bag. She folded her clothes neatly. She packed her son's things. She took only what she needed, nothing more. Her son watched her silently. "Mommy, are we going somewhere?" he asked. Amaka knelt in front of him and held his hands. "Yes," she said softly, "we are going somewhere better." He nodded, trusting her completely. Before leaving, Amaka looked around the house one last time. No tears, no hesitation, just a quiet goodbye to a life she had already left in her heart. She opened the door and walked away. When Daniel woke up that morning, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. "Amaka!" he called out. No response. He walked into the bedroom. The wardrobe door was slightly open. Some clothes were gone. His heart skipped. He rushed to the living room. Empty. No sound, no movement, no child. Then he saw it. On the small table near the window, a single piece of paper. His hands trembled as he picked it up. It was Amaka's handwriting. Simple, calm, final. "I gave you respect when you gave me pain. I gave you loyalty when you gave me betrayal. I gave you life and you almost took mine. I am choosing myself now. Take care of yourself." Daniel read it once, then again, and again. But this time, the house felt heavier than ever before. No laughter, no footsteps, no "Mommy" echoing from the corner. Just silence. the kind that reminds you of everything you've lost. He sat down slowly. For the first time, no one was there to listen to his excuses, no one to blame, no one to impress, just him and the consequences of his own choices. Outside, the sun was rising gently. Amaka walked down the street holding her son's hand. Her steps were slow but steady. Not because life was easy, but because she had finally chosen peace over pain. Her son looked up at her. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" Amaka smiled softly. "Yes," she said. "This time, we will be more than okay." Now let me ask you something. If you were Amaka, would you have stayed or walked away? And if you were Daniel, at what point do you think he truly lost everything? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story touched you even a little, share to others and subscribe because the next story might just be yours.